to the Fireside Chat as part of the Fox Hollow. My name is Schuyler.
I'm Keelin, and this is our guest.
I'm Charles.
And today we're going to be talking about relationship goals. So we're going to talk about the foundation of what makes a good relationship. We're going to talk about friendships and colleagues, romantic relationships, and also, unfortunately, toxic people. So starting off, we're going to discuss the foundations of what makes a good relationship and some of the qualities that you should seek to incorporate into that relationship. So one of those, I think, is communication and listening and understanding your partner, because so often we get into relationships where we're not listening to each other, and of course we can't progress forward with a healthy, positive relationship if we're not communicating, talking about things, and also listening to the other partner.
Communication is key.
So I want to take a step back, actually, and say that I think to be in relationship with others of any sort, friendship, collegial, educational, when you're in law school, for example, you have to be in good relationship with yourself. And so I think that how you treat yourself, how you think of yourself, and how you verbally describe yourself to others says a lot about how you're going to be in the world and how you'd probably be in marriage, etc. And I know this because I've struggled a lot with depression my entire life, and if you spend time apologizing all the time, if you spend time referencing yourself always in the negative, and if you spend time privately obsessing on how awful you are, it's going to be really difficult to be a good husband or wife or to be a good colleague. So I think that that's the start of this, is how you are in relationship with yourself often not always equals how you are in relationship with the world. I think it's sort of a reciprocal mirror almost.
And that goes back to our previous episode, our health and fitness episode, because we started out that episode by saying that you're going to make mistakes, but fundamentally the start of any health and fitness journey is unconditional self-love. That you're not going to be able to become a healthier person. You're not going to be able to give yourself grace in that process unless you are your own best friend in that process.
Amen. That's absolutely true. So I just want to make that assumption for the rest of the podcast, that we're starting from a point of people loving themselves to the extent that one should love self, and kind of moving forward from that. And I know that's probably you two could do 4 hours of a podcast on depression and wellness and all of that, but I just want to sort of have the assumption that we're working from that moving forward.
And also that you can't, if you don't love yourself and if you're not happy with yourself, you can't grow in a relationship outside of you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So that aside.
From there,
yeah.
Communication and listening and understanding. Not just listening, but understanding as well.
And the problem with communication is that it takes two people.
Yes, reciprocity.
Well, and I said it the last time I was a guest on your podcast, but it's always fascinating when we three chat because we represent three distinct phases in life. Keelin, you're young, you're still in your pre-20 years, quote unquote, and you're doing what young people do. I hate the phrase young people, but you're dating, you're experiencing that. Schuyler, you're basically engaged. You've been in a long-term relationship with your fiance. You're just out of grad school, and I'm
not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah,
well, yeah, unofficially.
It's been a long-term.
It's a long-term, yeah.
Yes.
And I've been married and with my now husband since 2002. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how we view relationships and those things. Keelin, I would be really interested to hear your views on communication and like what it means for you right now when you hear Schuyler talking about those things.
I mean, it's definitely for sure the most important thing overall. That's what I always say, communication, because watching like our parents grow in their relationship or lack thereof at times, it's pretty much always the problem is communication out of any relationship, and out of relationships that I've been in the past. Like, you have to have communication, you have to have honesty, you have to trust somebody and be able to talk to them about everything. Literally everything, because they are supposed to be your other half / your best friend / whatever.
Right.
So I think fear, and fear is a running theme of this podcast, talking about fear in our daily lives and overcoming our daily obstacles, to later discussing fear on the national level. But I think what prevents a lot of communication is fear, that when you try to put yourself out there and be vulnerable, that other person is not going to accept you. But then that goes back to what Charles, what you were saying, is that you just accept yourself. So you can be vulnerable, and it doesn't matter how other people feel, that you are accepting yourself first and foremost to overcome that fear.
Yeah, that's also the thing. Like, if you're being yourself and you know that you need to communicate this to somebody else, and if they don't accept that, then that's a relationship that you shouldn't have.
Yeah, that
they're not okay with who you are.
To be in a relationship, or that you're going to get rejected, because then you realize that it wasn't a good fit to begin with.
Yeah, you should not be afraid of your significant other, or be afraid of stepping on their toes or making them mad.
Yeah, I think that you are touching upon a key thing here, which is the ability to be vulnerable, and it takes two to tango. I find, at least in my stage of life, that as I look back, one of the biggest fears we have in relationships is the ability to be really honestly vulnerable with our significant other, because that opens us up to potential hurt. It opens us up to potential trauma. But a really healthy long-term relationship, in my own opinion, not that I'm an expert, we're experts only in our own things, right? But is the willingness to be vulnerable and to honor it when your significant other is as well. And as an example of that, it's really tough, right? During an argument, when you want to win and the other person wants to win, to finally get to a point of saying, okay, let's be better than we are currently. And let's just be really honest with each other and be vulnerable, opening yourself up to criticism. But then when your partner, your husband, wife, whatever is vulnerable, don't come at them and attack them when they're at their most honest and open as well. I think it's easy to talk about, but it's really challenging to do when you're really PO'd in an argument and you just want to win. And I think that's true for all of us, right? Even pacifist folks. Sometimes you just want to win an argument.
Yeah, I think it's especially hard, and I've seen it with other colleagues, professors, attorneys, because we're so ingrained in that argumentative phase where you have to win an argument. But when you're having a conversation with your partner, that it's not about winning. You can't win, because ultimately you're hurting the relationship. If you want to win, it's not about winning the argument, it's about winning at the relationship. And so what that takes is collaboration and listening and empathy, not
winning.
And so I know that it's hard for me to step back and be I'm not trying to win a discussion or an argument or my way of thinking. Of course, I'm very opinionated and I'll advocate on behalf of my opinion in the relationship, but not attacking the other individual. And that's hard to do, especially when we're so used to doing that in our jobs and our daily lives. It's tough.
I know what I'm about to say. I'm going to be a super hypocrite, because I'm going to talk about having a fully clear mind in a relationship, and I'm saying this after having imbibed a glass of wine. But it's a good metaphor for me, because I think that sometimes in marriage, for example, we get so absorbed in our own narrative, our own journey, our own life, because that's what we have to do every day, right? We have to wake up and be Keelin or be Schuyler or be Charles. And it's really challenging, again, at least for me, to, in those challenging moments of marriage, to hit the pause button and think, wait, not everything is objective. I mean, there are very few things in marriage and life that are going to be right and wrong. There are some, right? In fact, there's probably a lot.
Sure.
But often in daily squabbles about the dishes are in the sink, or the toilet lid was left up, and that's an example I don't really care about, because I'm gay and there's two guys in the house, so it's really, I think, important to keep that clear mind, that clear head, and I'm not referring to alcohol, obviously, but just to think,
you keep coming to this wine.
I do. Well, it's empty, so I'd love another glass at some point. But I will just say, I think I've learned that it's really important to do that sort of intentional thing about take a breath and think about the other person's perspective, especially when you don't want to say things that you really regret. And I think probably that's where my big point is, maybe that's where I'm going. While not everything is objective in a marriage, what is objective is sometimes we can say things to a partner so hurtful that you sometimes can't get over it, or even if the relationship lasts, there's no way to undo certain damage. You can apologize, but I know for me, people always think that I'm Mr. Kindness and all of that, and I think that I am, but when I'm really angry, I think like most people, there certainly have been times where I've been tempted to throw out the most vicious thing that I can say to my partner in an argument, and that does nothing except hurt the other person.
Exactly.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, yeah, definitely. Because that leads to building trust. And we were just talking about, when you have a really powerful relationship, you're able to be vulnerable with each other. And building trust through authenticity and vulnerability is what makes that stronger. But then that also, of course, opens you up to knowing so much about somebody that you could hurt them in a way that you don't want to, that you might be tempted to when things get heated, when things aren't going the way that you want them to. And that's really dangerous. But that's what vulnerability is all about, because you're stronger together because of your vulnerabilities.
So, thank you, Schuyler. I think that's a key point. So, Keelin, I don't mean to keep, throwing you out there in front of the mic, as it were, but I just remember being your age and dating, and some of the things I did at the time, I think back and go, wow, that was really effective and healthy for my age. Some of it wasn't. And at my age of 40, I definitely would not do some of those things that weren't again. So for you dating and having a boyfriend now, what for you is a healthy way to enter into a relationship? Like from the date, because it's a different world for you. It's like online, it's
Tinder,
online
dating.
I'm assuming Grindr is not for you. But,
no. But I don't know. I guess every relationship is very different, as my mom was just complaining about the other day, because I'm currently in a newer relationship. She was saying, don't you think it's a little early to spend the night with someone? And I then brought back, because Schuyler and her long-term relationship, he is now moving down here.
No, we're moving into each
moving
other.
Moving in with each other after
Lincoln, Nebraska,
forever.
in the Midwest. He's moving from Omaha.
We don't want to talk about that.
Moving in with each other, it's really exciting.
But because
4 years ago,
he lives
where were we at?
an hour away.
Right.
And my current boyfriend
A
lives
semi-long
an hour away. They
distance.
live in the same city.
Oh.
So when you live so far away, and when you have a little bit of a long distance relationship, I mean, not to the point of, cross country, but it you have to make sometimes, Schuyler, you were saying yesterday, things progress quickly but slower at the same time.
Yeah, it's your timeline both moves up and moves back at the same time.
That's a fascinating way of putting it. No, it makes perfect sense.
Because
actually,
you had a long-term or long distance.
It was long, and I always feel like I have to. And before I'm going to say, for a long time, I apologize with what I was going to talk about here in a moment and say, I don't mean to be political, but it was political, and it still is, and I want to apologize for saying it. Yes, my husband and I had what was ultimately a 1 year and 7 month, basically long-term relationship. He was in Nebraska, I was in Indiana, and a key part of this is we met in graduate school at Oklahoma State University in 2002. In 2004, we both graduated, he with his PhD, me with my master's. He had a postdoc at Purdue University, so we went up to Indiana, and I've always followed his career, happily so, more or less. There's been more times, I'm not going to lie. But then his postdoc concluded, as they do. They're on contract funding, and so he came to Nebraska, had a job here. We weren't legally married in the eyes of this nation until 2015, and I am very severely asthmatic, and I have to have health insurance. That's been the case since I was 18 months old. If marriage equality had existed, and by the way, to put a fine point, I'm sharing this because relationships are affected by the social context and family context and political context of any time. Right. If I had been able to move with him, I would have been in Nebraska in fall of 2006. But I started applying for jobs, and of course I just started my career in Indiana. I was a young professional, actually about your age, Schuyler, a little bit older, and nothing was coming. I tried and tried and tried. And so what I learned during those 1 year and 7 months, and by the way, the end of the story is I finally just gave up the ghost and took a lower paying gig that would get me here. I gave up any expectation of fair pay just so I could have insurance. Is that everything we talk about in relationships is really important in person and hella hard when you're doing it over a distance. And that's true whether it's like for us, 06 to early 08, or now. I remember when Jeff and I would talk on the phone when he was here and I was in Indianapolis, and arguments, and by the way, pause button, arguments should happen. I think that conflict can be very healthy.
Oh, yeah.
But also
there's conflict growth.
Right, but then there's like the nonverbal part of conflict and the nonverbal part of arguments when you're looking at your boyfriend or your long-term SO, significant other. I couldn't see his nonverbals and he couldn't see mine, and so some of the worst arguments we had over the phone, and this was before-ish Skype and all of that, they were really hard, and they were at times detrimental to our growth and our relationship status. So
hug each other,
and
can't console each other in that moment. Right, it's really hard.
It's really hard, and I guess I have two things I'm kind of probably like getting at here. One is, it's really challenging and it's really hard. The other is, relationships are affected at any given point in history by everything going around, starting with your family, your religion, society, and politics. And Jeff and I my husband and I would not have had that particular challenge of conflicts that were unhealthy and divisive if I'd been able to move with him. And I would have, I swear, I would have moved here in 06. I was just starting my career, but if I could have moved here, been on his insurance, and had a fair time to like look for a job, I would have done it, but it wasn't our reality.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part of this discussion is relationships are so diverse, and what's true for one may not be true for another. And I know you guys agree with that.
And other people sleeping over at somebody's place, intimate relations, and everything else like that's
it varies. Really some people choose to sleep with each other the first day, the first night, and they can be together for 50 years.
Absolutely.
Versus somebody could also wait until marriage to have sex, and they could have the same long-term relationship. Like it's everybody varies, and same with like open relationships versus like all that kind of stuff. Like people like different things. You find somebody that matches the same beliefs that you have to some point. They vibe with you,
because that's where the bad conflict comes into play.
If you want an open relationship
values
and your significant other doesn't,
you're trying to be together, it's not gonna work. But
I mean, I think that, so I guess I watched The View, and yes, Meghan McCain is interesting at times, but no, she was I've watched The View forever. Came on my freshman year of college, and I was like, all of a sudden I had daytime, so let's watch The View.
Of course.
But Meghan McCain was saying recently, talking about I think her values or something, it was just probably a week and a half ago, and she said that she, very conservative woman, very socially conservative, she knows a woman who did basically what guys do when they're dating, which is you sleep around. And this woman this friend of Megan's was apparently super open about it and comfortable with that, and good for her, because it's not fair that there's this double standard for men and women. Right? And so, honestly, and I'm not picking on your mom, because I love your mom, but let's say hypothetically, I think a lot of moms would have said that, right? Hey, Keelin, is the first night the right time to do that? But how many mothers of sons would even ask, did you spend the night? Is that, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think there's this societal thing.
Dad didn't ask. He was like, he didn't say, is it too early? It was
mom.
No,
exactly. And so for Meghan McCain's story, this woman had sex with, on the first date, generally, and one of the guys with whom she had sex, she was like a serial monogamist, they're married now, and have been for years, and apparently have a happy family. So I like what you were saying, Keelin, that there's not one size fits all.
No, definitely not.
How to be happy in a long-term relationship.
And you figured that out through positive, healthy communication. Because if you don't talk about it, then you're not going to know, and then that's when trouble happens.
Big time.
So we have kind of these buckets. So there's maintaining friendships and making good with your colleagues, and we've already covered a lot about romantic relationships, and then we also want to talk a little bit about toxic people, but I want to talk about friendships, because those are really important to me, because one of my best friends is, we were talking about long distance relationships, but she's a long distant friend, and that
has been.
She always has been. We met in France. Really awesome story. We were studying abroad together. She lived in Indiana, and now she lives in Colorado. I live in Nebraska, so it's not too far away, but we've tried to once a year, once every couple of years, visit each other. But that's hard. But one of the traps that I think that at least I fall into with any friendship, but especially like long distance, relationships and friendships is not being the one to reach out first. Because I'm always wondering, like, how is she doing? Mm-hmm. Does she care about what's going on in my life? And I'm like, but I'm not the one reaching out, so I need to be more proactive about reaching out to her and maintaining that friendship instead of waiting around and thinking, what's going on. And that happened this month, too, because I'm like, maybe you can't, like, force somebody to be friends and stuff, but I'm trying to maybe make friends, like, locally, too, and I thought, like, I can't be waiting for other people to ask me out to lunch, so I asked an old colleague out to lunch just to catch up with her and say hi. Like, you have to be proactive in your own right.
Yeah.
To maybe make relationships and connections.
And the thing is, a lot of times we get so caught up in our own world, in our own life, that we forget how to have friends and, like, how to communicate with them and hang out with them, and, like, how to make time for friends, which is very important.
Yes.
Like, when you're in a relationship, your best friend is your significant other.
Or should be.
Yes.
Healthfully, I would say it should.
But then you also... One of your best friends.
Yeah.
One of your... What
Not
should be many best
exclusive,
friends, but they're one of your best friends, and if you live with them, you see them every single day, so it's kind of weird to then... Unless you're, like, hanging out with people together, it's weird to get the chance, like, in a marriage, to, like, get out of the house and, like, go do that. It's kind of, like, out of your way to socialize with other people.
Yeah, like, I'm always like, I need to go out to drinks with Charles.
Absolutely.
But then I don't ask.
Yeah, same way.
Like,
and again, let the record show, drinks with Charles or drinks by Charles seems to be a theme.
It's sacred. No, it's sacred.
No, I love it, Schuyler, yeah.
And I love that time with you.
Yeah, absolutely. But we make that time, and we check in every now and then. But I guess I have to say, I quote-unquote, own our privilege. We're local. Like, we're friends who are both in Lincoln, and so I can probably go, let's say, 3 months, and text you on the third month and say, hey, let's do drinks. But I probably will have seen you we go to church together at church or out, or we Facebook message. That is a joyous time we meet up, but we've had some contact in between. For you and your friend, as you're describing Colorado, I think that's a unique challenge, but that's, I think, really, really common for people as they age to maintain those friendships. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll think of my parents, you guys think of yours, and we each have parents who have been married for my parents, they got married in 1976, so 42 years, and your parents have been together for quite a while as well.
Coming up 25 years.
Yeah, and so when I think of my mom and dad, I think that it's been off and on, the friendships that they had prior to meeting each other to now. There's not been like a solid connection. Mom and dad have always through ups and downs and thick and thin. They're still there, obviously, and thank God. But I can't say that either were really good about saying to the other, you're my best friend, and then I also have these friends that have been there my entire life. So I think it's hard when I guess what I'm saying is the longer a relationship lasts, and the more you invest in one's own partner, wife, spouse, significant other, whatever, the harder it is to also make sure you're healthfully practicing friendship with those other people who've been dear to you, because there's only so much time in a day.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So for I hope it's okay if I use the name of the friend in Colorado. If not, I can just...
Yeah, you
so
can
Natalie,
yes.
just FYI, I knew who we were talking about.
Yeah.
So for you and Natalie, you, Schuyler, you have a big weekend coming up, right? You just said it. You're going to be moving in with your long-term boyfriend into an apartment, living together for the first time. That's going to take a ton of time, rightly so, for both you and Daniel.
And me.
You and Keelin, God bless you. You might have time to text Natalie.
My sister's my best friend.
That's very true. That's awesome when that happens too.
It's true. We do have a very
But I guess you're probably not going to have a ton of time, like 6 hours to spend on Skype with Natalie or chatting, just because you're going to be super busy in the next week. Is my point. It's hard to maintain friendships as we age, unfortunately.
Right. So I just made it as one of my friendship goals to just actively and proactively contact Natalie.
Yeah.
Oh, she doesn't. I hope that doesn't sound like really.
By the way, Natalie's amazing. Anyone listening to this, she's like the perfect best friend you could have. I adore her. I've met her once, and she's been so dear to Schuyler.
Fantastic, and I felt so bad that I'm like, I don't want to feel like we do have one of those friendships to where we don't see each other for a year, and then we can connect like that. But I definitely want to maintain that relationship and not just let it drift apart, because she is so amazing. And so it's actually written, one of my active goals for this year is to just actively
talk to people.
text her
That's awesome.
several times
That's great.
a month. I know that, and at first it doesn't seem natural. Like I'm texting her because it's on my goals list, not because I'm like. But I do think of her a lot. But I don't necessarily text her every time I think about her, and so I have to, like, kind of force myself into being proactive about that because I care about maintaining that relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm so bad about, like, actually acting upon the, good feels, thinking like, oh, how's she doing at her new job?
Yeah.
Or how's her family doing and all that stuff. But
when you think about that, you don't, like, immediately text her, but then you have to think about it later, like, these are the things that I meant to ask Natalie about.
And it's so silly because I'm like, oh, I don't want to harass her, but it's not harassment because, like, every time I text, she's like, oh, yes,
I miss
brilliant.
you. Hey,
we miss each other. It's not, I don't know why there's always that reservation or, like, if you're going to reach out to somebody, you're going to be bugging them, but you love each other, so it's, of course you're not bugging
and you're both
them.
living such, like, different lives right now, and, like, different places, and with different communities of friends around you, but then you also have to connect at the same time.
So,
Yeah.
well, I think it's also that very sweet thing, and it's true, of you love each other, but also being super real and, like, honest about your emotion. Also this, well, not you, Natalie, necessarily, but, well, she should contact me first. She knows I'm busy and I'm doing blah, blah, blah. Or the other person thinking,
Yeah, I know.
because people can get you get so close
And
to
then you'll
someone that
never
you kind of just
contact
expect
each
it.
other.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, my one person in terms of, like, a friendship outside of my marriage comes to mind, and that is, I actually referenced her the last time we were here about her kind of life journey. My friend Christina, and it's really wonderful and fascinating to reflect upon her friendship now at my age. She's a couple years younger than me. We met in college, and we were sort of, I'll give you the elevator speech version. It was sort of, we ran in the same circle, but we weren't best friends. And one night, her roommate, I was out as gay to them, not that it matters, but her roommate said...
It does.
It does. Her roommate said...
You are.
That's true. Her roommate, thank you, Schuyler. Her roommate said, hey, Charles, I'm going to be gone for a night. Would you mind chilling out with Christina? And I knew Chris socially, and so sure. So we hung out, and it was, the old commercials about, like, chocolate peanut butter, and it was just like that, and it just meshed, and we were bonded for a long time. We called each other soulmates. We said, in all seriousness, that we wouldn't get married without running the husband by the other one, and I had veto power, and she did. And when I was in grad school, this was like the year 9/11 happened. So Schuyler, you would have been about 10 years old, and Keelin, you would have been very young.
Third grade.
Yeah. But for me, I was like, 23. Chris and I were on the phone nonstop, and we felt so amazingly close. But, and this is my point about how friendships change and grow, life went on, and it ended up that there were whole year spans where we didn't have contact. We've had our fights over the years, and again, conflict can be healthy, and I think Chris and I would both acknowledge that. She found a guy, I didn't have to approve him, he's a hell of a good guy, and I found a guy, I got married, vice versa. Right. And now she's happily married with 3 kids, one of whom's a freshman in high school, and then, stepped down. So, Chris and I joke that we're going to be that friendship that we end up in if God forbid, but both of our spouses predecease us, Chris and I are going to end up in an old folks home together, and it'll be just the two of us sitting on rocking chairs, but there's a connection there, I guess is what I'm getting at. And to what you're saying about your friend Natalie, a long time would go by where I'd think, okay, Chris should be contacting me, but then it kind of changed into as life got longer and I grew and I got older. I knew she was busy, she knew I was busy, and I think 10 years can go by and Chris and I can touch base and it's still like no time had passed. I love her. I think
that's the friendships that you should
absolutely
maintain throughout your entire life.
Absolutely. And again, separate from my marriage
valuable.
And the best friendship I cherish there, Chris is really, really key to me. And I guess the last thing I'll add is this total side note, but the technology of our friendship has changed. When we first were talking, it was like long-distance phone cards on our corded phone from my from my apartment, and then it was cell phones and texting, and then most recently we connected on Twitter. So
social media.
Those I think are the wonderful relationships that happen, and they're probably the most important ones to keep, because at some point, 2 things happen in life. If we have a lifelong relationship or whatever, our spouse dies or we die, either way, you need to make sure that you're staying in a relationship with one another. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
So I wonder, forming new friendships, like Keelin, you've had this unique experience of your high school experience, and Schuyler, you too. Like, it's one thing to talk about lifelong friends, but I do want to take a moment and say, so you're taking time to go out and have coffee with people. You're making an active goal to meet new folks. I find that really challenging as I age.
It is. Yeah. It's so hard. And I'm 26, and I'm like, what happened to all of those old friendships? It was so easy to make friends when you're younger, but then
absolutely
trying to make time to build a new friendship is not easy.
No, it's not. Keelin, for you, do you feel like you've had the same, are you one of those, like, I've had the same best friend since kindergarten, or are you more like I am, where you have maybe like one person close to you and then friendships come and go?
That's a little hard. I feel like a lot of my friendships come and go, I guess, as with my relationships, because a lot of times when I get in a relationship with somebody, they already have a friend group that they've maintained, that they've known their entire life, and then so they become my friends, and then if we break up down the road, then those, like, maybe a couple of those friends become acquaintances and still talk to me on occasion, but they're not, like, really friends anymore. But I have a few people that I've kept in my life from very little.
Real little.
I have one friend who I haven't talked to in a while, but I know that as soon as I hit her up, like, it's like nothing's changed. It's one of those. I've known her since I was born. She's at the church. She was 3 months old.
Her baby buddy
when I was born.
Oh my gosh.
She was born in January. I was born in March.
Do I know this? You don't need to say initials for the podcast, but you can say initials for the podcast. So, do I know this person?
Yeah.
Okay, you can tell me later, but that's cool that you guys have known each other that long.
But her for sure, and I mean, we go through different things, and I'm actually not 100% sure where she's at in her life, but that's one of the things, like, if I think about it, I'll have to message her and reconnect as everybody will.
Okay, we're going to turn to workplace, community, and environment, and how important it is to have a positive workplace and healthy connections and relationships with your colleagues. So I can say that my workplace, generally speaking, and for having almost 40 people, like, we have a very healthy workplace climate that we encourage healthy communication between coworkers, and I think that's really valuable. But I've also had interactions in volunteer settings and in workplace settings where you don't necessarily vibe with other people, and how problematic that can make going into work, even if you like your job, but you don't necessarily like the people that you go to work with, and how detrimental that can be.
So I think that when I think a toxic workplace relationship can absolutely ruin your workplace experience. It just absolutely could. It doesn't matter if you're delivering pizzas, which all jobs are noble and awesome, anyone wants to work, or if you're a lawyer at a top firm in New York City. A toxic workplace really becomes the dominant factor in terms of whether you're happy there or not. And at least for me, I can't work long term where I'm not happy. And there are some people who can, but I can't. And so, yeah, toxic relationships they're challenging. And so I think then the question becomes, how do we handle it, right? There's always I haven't had a job where there wasn't someone who I saw, like, there's always someone at a job, I think any job, where they don't maybe have the same communication style as you, or if they're toxic.
Right.
So then what are we doing, though? That's an open question. Keelin, Schuyler, how do we handle that in those circumstances? Because I think that determines how we proceed and how we resolve things. And I'm taking a sip of my second glass of wine because it's appropriate as we talk about toxic things.
I mean, you can't blow up at your colleagues.
You can't?
Yeah, weird.
That might explain why I'm joking. Yeah. Every single time it's bad, yeah.
Yeah, you can't blow up. I mean, you shouldn't blow up at anybody in general.
Joking,
like,
of course,
to the point of being really toxic. But you really need to, it's around the workplace, it's really you don't want to step on anybody's toes, and you don't want to tell somebody to do something or not to do something when it's not your job to do that. And it's technically your boss's job to be like, hey, you need to do this or that. But a lot of times you need to ask favors of your colleagues or just talk to them and have a conversation with them. And if you don't vibe with them, that could end badly. So
for me, the workplace thing is nuanced for Americans. Like, I've never been to Europe. Schuyler, you have. You're far more ensconced in sort of European culture, I think. Americans spend more time with their colleagues and their bosses and their employees than with our own families.
Yeah.
And my editorial aside about we should get, that's why I mentioned Europe, the leave and the vacation time that other countries do. Right now we don't. And so we're spending so much time with individuals, and there's always power differentials. Mostly. It's either an employee of yours or a boss of yours. Sometimes it's a direct peer, but even then there's a power issue because you have no power there. When there's power, how you use it is key. For me, I like to think at my best. And I've never been fired. I've always tried to handle situations with grace. It hasn't always happened, as I think is true for most of us. But I'll play my hand here. So I'm Unitarian Universalist, as are we all. Very proud of you. But the first principle of Unitarian Universalism, for people who don't know, is that every person has worth and dignity. And in our church, that's talked about a lot, and it's kind of cheesy to say, but I've learned it's really important to practice it. When like there's someone who is toxic and coming at me, or there's something weird going on, I keep that as my starting point. Especially when I can't see when it's hard to see them in an honorable light otherwise. I try to remember
why.
No, and also there's someone's mom or daughter. Everybody has a life outside of work. I always try as a starting point to assume good intent and to remember, okay, this is a person that has worth and dignity. So for me,
having a bad day.
Yeah. So in a toxic setting, that's a starting point. Just being super real, though, that doesn't always mean that there's a good ending. Sometimes it still remains toxic, and so you do what you have to do in those circumstances. But I just think the fact that we spend more time at work than we do with our personal sphere is why it's important to end on this as we wrap up the discussion, the toxic piece of relationships. What about, it's just occurring to me, social media relationships? So a lot of people assume that you can, befriend or follow, someone on Twitter, and maybe you did that 3 weeks ago, and then all of a sudden you get into a Twitter war, and that's a toxic relationship. It's still weird to me at my age to think that people view social media, I'm not talking about a long-term friendship, but like contacts and that toxic element is really toxic versus, no, turn your phone off, walk away, and John Doe you don't know on Twitter just has a different opinion. Life goes on. So I think we're also in this weird place societally where we're sort of warping what it means to have a toxic relationship.
Yeah, and it's easy to get into it with people on the internet, especially if you don't know them very well, especially if you're undercover of you're anonymous. It's, we lost a little bit of civility there, but I also think just like social media is just a platform for communication. So it's still you, though. It's still you interacting on there. You can't make excuses for your own behavior if you're going off the wall. And I think just like with money, it amplifies who you are. The more money you have, the more, if you want to do good things, you're going to continue to do good and even better things the more money you have. If you are doing really negative things and you get more money, you're probably going to continue to do negative things. Like money just amplifies who you are as a person. Social media amplifies who you are as a person. As I mentioned before, can be very argumentative, which is why I don't get on Facebook very often, because there's a lot of opinionated people, and I don't want to waste my time getting into arguments with them, but I know that's what I naturally would tend to do and have done, and that's not a good use of my time. So that just amplifies that, in my opinion, negative characteristic of getting into arguments with people about things that don't really matter, because it's not going to solve the problem. Because you're not going to change their opinion.
No.
But, so those can be toxic interactions. You're not necessarily toxic people. It just amplifies some of your either sometimes positive interactions if you're really supportive of people, want to connect with them on social media, but oftentimes negative characteristics, and you can still be on social media. You just have to like check that in yourself and be like, okay, just be careful in this realm. Don't feed the trolls kind of situation.
But I also love like on like girls hyping other girls up and guys hyping other guys up.
It's very supportive.
Or, you know,
it can be.
Whatever, just hyping people up on like if they post a picture and just like, oh my gosh, she looks so good and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a lot of it, that can be toxic as well.
But just flattery, just for the sake of flattery and ego.
But it's like when people
can be supportive too.
They're like genuinely doing that and like supporting you, or they think like whatever you post is cool, like that. Those can be like very beneficial relationships for you to have.
Absolutely.
And you can also meet more people through social media. Like if you never leave your house, me and Schuyler, then it can be very beneficial to meet somebody, and that's a lot of how like online dating and that comes about. It's like meeting people online because
I met Daniel online.
Yeah, both of you, I think.
Yeah,
right? Met your boyfriends online.
Yep.
And I didn't. I met again. There was an online component. I mean, there was it wasn't the Great Depression. I mean, there was online dating. Really? I know, right? I know. There was. I'm not Methuselah by any means. Like there was definitely online dating, but it was really minimal, and the percentage over the years of online dating has increased. But I met my husband in I hate this phrase, real world setting. We were in a gay straight alliance together at our university. But Keelin, regarding what you said, that there can be like this upshot to online relationships, I think that is also really important because it's really easy to get into this trap of everything's toxic, everything's bad. No, just like so much of what we've discussed, it's nuanced.
Yeah.
And I have another friendship that comes to mind just very briefly. She and I met in the 1990s at church camp, and we were pen pals. We would send letters back and forth. Her name's Anjay, for years. And we, across all media changing, have stayed in touch across Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And I saw Anjay once in the last 20 years. I don't know, 15, whatever. And we met for lunch in Dallas. But our friendship is very much now about social media, and we still stay in contact, and that's very important. That relationship, that way of staying in touch with somebody is far more valuable and meaningful across platforms than any stupid Twitter fight I'd have.
Yeah.
Right. And I do want to go back and say that, as you mentioned, Charles, before, sometimes people are just, they're having bad days, and that we need to approach any situation with empathy. But what happens if it's a pattern of toxic behavior and that, somebody is crossing boundaries? And boundaries are really important. It's important to go back to our founding principle here and say, love yourself unconditionally, know yourself, know what your boundaries are, and then be able to politely, say, no, this is a boundary. People who aren't toxic, who aren't, they don't have like a personality disorder, cluster B, or toxic, they're going to respond to a boundary by saying, oh my God, I'm sorry. I did not mean to do that going forward. They'll apologize and everything. Toxic people will get angry. They'll get passive aggressive. They'll be really upset that you put up a boundary. And how do we respond to people who are not going to be constructive? One, I think just know that some people won't like you, that you're not going to have positive interactions with everybody. And two, like if you're in a workplace environment or you have to interact with somebody every day just to distance yourself, don't give them that emotional feedback that they want. And if it's somebody that you can cut from your life, sometimes you just have to say bye. Sometimes you have to let people go.
That's been the biggest lesson for me, is not everybody's going to like me. And I enter...
It's a tough lesson.
It's really a tough lesson.
And it's so true.
Even if you're the nicest person.
Even if you're the nicest person, right? And I like to think I'm a generally friendly person. Yeah, I try. And thank you. And it's always shocking to me when I see intentional cruelty. or intentional unkindness, as it were. When I see someone choosing, because it's easy to choose kindness. That's always the easy path, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's not tough. You think so? So when I see people who are choosing passive aggression when it comes to communication, or a better way of saying it is not being direct in communication, I'm always surprised. I could live to be 45 or 900, and I will always be surprised when someone does that. But it's been an important lesson, and for me, there are people I've had to cut out of my life across years because they were toxic for me. And I think that's like the main thing I've learned about toxicity is who suffers the most if I remain in that situation. It is me. Just look in the mirror.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you either have to handle it or get out of it.
It's like, oh no, like I feel so bad having to cut this person out of my life. But
Absolutely.
they've been a terrible friend. They've been a terrible partner.
Absolutely.
Not really a partner, but you've been dating them, or even a family member or relative. I think it's really hard to take that step to quote unquote break up with somebody, whether they're a friend or relative or you're in a relationship with them, because you're not good for each other, or they're being disrespectful and they're crossing boundaries.
And again, we're all three very different ages, but I'm pretty sure we've all three had to cut off people from our lives in some way, shape, or form.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, maybe fortunately, I don't.
Yeah.
You learn.
It's unfortunate and fortunate. It's like the loss of
life too.
I
Where
once
you mature and grow, and then realize that person's not growing.
I read years ago, and I hold on to this, and this is probably a big metaphor for me as I think about relationships. Relationships of any sort, marriage, work, friendship, church, whatever, they're like a trail. They have a starting point and an ending point. And some of them don't end till our life ends. Those are the rare ones, the rare trails. Some of them end far before, but they all have high points, they all have low points, they all have, you can continue the metaphor, points that are easy to walk, points that are tough to traverse. But much like a trail, when it ends and when it begins, it just is. It's neither necessarily sad or bad, it just is. And so that's what I try to remember, as silly as that metaphor might seem, is sometimes that trail, that journey that was a particular friendship ends. I had a friendship, details don't necessarily matter, but I had a 10 plus year friendship that ended in the last year, and it was tough, and it was not fun, and it was awful. But I remind myself sometimes things come to an end. And I guess ultimately, I don't passively accept it that it came to an end. I just say, if I feel like I, again, honored someone's worth of dignity and did what I could and tried to communicate, I've conducted my due diligence. I've done what I can. And if friendships still end or relationships still end, it is. And if I'm a better person at the end of all that, I know I've done the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one last thing, is that everything that has happened in your life has made you who you are. Everybody that's come into your life and left your life, it all makes you who you are. And if you are happy with who you are right now, be thankful for those relationships that have ended badly, or like
it's a positive
trials that you've gotten through. Like, I wouldn't have had the same emotional growth if I hadn't been through a lot of the stuff that I had been through. I wouldn't be who I am and know as much. You learn a lot from bad relationships and bad friendships. So, yeah.
Very good point. You learn. That's a key word. You learn. I think as long as we're always learning about ourselves and trying to be a better person in relationship with ourselves and the world, that's what matters. Because I ultimately think there are two states of being, growth and decay. And the minute we stop learning is the minute we're not growing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining in this discussion. Next week we're going to be talking kind of in a similar vein. We're going to be talking about family relationships specifically. So all of the good and bad, and unpacking, biological family, chosen family, whatever the case may be. What does it mean to have family and love family, and sometimes walk away from family if they're toxic, as we've been discussing here. So I hope that you join us for next week's podcast, and please post in the comments if you had a really good relationship or really bad relationship and how you handled that situation. We'd love to hear from you, and hope to see you next week.
If you like what we're doing here, please consider becoming a supporter of the show. The Fireside Chat podcast is part of a new entertainment hub called The Fox Hollow. We'll have shows about money, gaming, music, legal comedy, and more on YouTube, and we post new Fireside Chat episodes every Monday. If you'd like to ask a question or submit a public comment to be shared on the podcast, please email us at thefoxhollowhub@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please become a patron by donating at patreon.com/thefoxhollow, linked in the description below. You can follow us on Instagram at thefoxhollow.yt. And if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another podcast or video.
Also, if you haven't checked out Robinhood yet, you definitely should. Robinhood is an online investing and banking app. They give power back to the people by not charging fees or commissions when you go to buy and sell stocks. Use this referral link to get started. share.robinhood.com/SCHUYLG7. You will receive 1 free share of a random stock, and you have the chance to win some big name investments like Apple and Berkshire Hathaway. By using this referral code, both you, the listener, and myself will receive a random share of stock. This is a great way to give back to the show while also getting a gift in return. We post new podcasts every Monday. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next week. Bye!